it was a notion of, are you technical enough? There's this divide or this understanding in security especially that there are people who are technical and there are people who are non-technical. And I didn't come from a technical background. I approached security from a finance and economics background. What that gave me was an understanding of the business side and the business risk and business problems that customers were having. And I learned from the engineers that I got put on projects with, and we taught each other. So an engineer who was great at the technical depths of security taught me what they knew, and I taught them how to present to an executive and how to get what they wanted out of their own career. And so I think you really just got to use the assets you have and apply them to an interesting problem, and obviously be part of a growing company. All opportunity comes out of growth.
That's right. And a lot of people are in your situation where you don't like to get out of a comfort zone, meaning that somebody like in your shoes, you mentioned, you call the engineer, call a tech person, and we'll have them do most of the talking. And they never cross the chasm, meaning they never get to the point like you did. You somehow decided, okay, I'll learn through osmosis, being there and interacting with these people, and take ownership over being technical because that's where you knew where there was a gap. So again, that's different. A lot of people don't cross.
Yeah.
They keep doing what they know they're good at.
I think it's an advantage to do it very early in your career because you're willing to start from the bottom. And there's always this impression or thought of, I'm too late. I don't know enough. I'm just starting in cybersecurity. I had that feeling too when I was working on my first SIM project. I went to the engineer who was working with me on the project and said, now that the client's out of the room, explain to me what a SIM is and why it matters and what it does. But getting that deep fundamental understanding early in your career and being vulnerable in that way will allow you to master that craft. If you just want to go along and not dive deep into the craft that you're doing, you're never going to succeed in that way. So I think there's a bit of vulnerability there. It's surrounding yourself with great people and just seeking out people who are willing to teach you and being open to learning is key. And then obviously working hard and applying yourself and seeking out that knowledge.
At what point in time, I think every career has this like juncture where you take a fork in the road, and in hindsight, it was a good decision to make because you had the ability to, at some point in time, to switch roles and move somewhere else, but you decided to stick around and rise with the organization. Is there any step you've taken that you can pinpoint and say, yeah, that was hindsight, that was a good decision, maybe very successful, because there's always something that propels you to really the next level.
I can pinpoint many bad decisions. Pinpointing
and that's okay too, right? Yeah. Let's talk about that.
I think so. Some of the bad decisions, you can always. It's easier to look back and be critical, I think, sometimes, and say, what things could I have done differently? Right. And so there's this debate amongst many people in many different fields around whether you should stay somewhere for a long time and help build a company and participate in that growth, or whether you should bounce around for the benefit of your own career and get different experiences. When you're in a growing company, the company changes every quarter. It's a different type of company. And I felt that one of the good decisions I made was to stick with a growing company while it was changing to get that diverse experience. Other people would look back and say, I should have joined CrowdStrike PIPO. Right?
But that's what I'm saying, right? There's probably a lot of suitors, right? At some point in time, there's a lot of people who got to you and say, hey, Ira, can you join my team? And if you use a very lucrative salary, promise you the moon with stock options and all, you're laughing because I'm sure it happens more than once.
Yeah, and it's easy to look back and cherry pick and say, I could have joined these 5 companies pre-IPO and retired by now. But realistically, when the moment is happening, it's hard to pick the winner. There are a lot of great companies out there, some of which go public to a massive valuation, others which never do go public. They can still be good companies, but they don't quite make it, especially in software. Picking that winner, you can see early on what the winners could be, but getting in there at the right time is challenging. So I think I would encourage anybody to just find a place that is growing, that you believe in the technology and you believe in the management, and make sure that you're participating in that upside, even if it's in a small way. Make sure that you participate in that.
And what attracted you specifically to this space? As you mentioned, you come from a slightly different background, economics, business, and especially now, there's a lot of people want to get into this space because it's hot, right? and their perception is on. What attracted you specifically to the space, and what do you like, or maybe you don't like about it?
I think initially what attracted me was generally I was attracted to technology because of the huge changes that were taking place in consumer technology at the time. When you hold something in your hand like a smartphone and realize the sea change of consumer technology, you think about how is this going to affect the rest of the world? How does this affect business? That was really interesting to me. I knew I had to come up with an angle. How am I going to get in if I don't have a technical background? And for me, finance and economics was a good way into that. And so I think you need to find your angle and you need to establish what value you're bringing into that.
So what do you think is more important, to be tech savvy, now that you have both, or business savvy, or does it matter? Or if you want to be successful, what do you pick first?
I think a mix of both is important. Creativity is super important. What initially attracted me to cybersecurity was really originally coming from an interest in political science and the idea of risk. I thought it was very interesting to explore how companies manage that risk. But when you get into the field, you realize that's not really what this is on a day-to-day basis. It's IT problems. It's this person's password expired. It's this person's credentials got compromised. Digital transformation problems, technical debt. That's what a lot of our cybersecurity hygiene problems are. So I would say at the beginning, I was a bit disappointed at how disconnected the concept of geopolitical risk and political risk was from the concept of cybersecurity risk. Only later in my career, when I started working with very large companies, helping them manage their risk through technical controls and business controls, was I able to really square that and say, okay, I'm working on interesting stuff here that scratches that itch that I cared about at the beginning. And so what skills do you need in order to do that? I think it's a mixture of creativity. You need to fundamentally understand who am I working for, whether it's my customer or my company, and what is the business model here? I really just think that's, regardless of whether you're an engineer, a developer, a project manager, senior manager in a company, how does my company make money? What are the basic economics of that? Why do people pay us? Are we profitable? Are we not profitable? Are we growing if we're not profitable? And when are we going to get to profitability? And how does my day job contribute to that? And if I can tie everything that I do with my customer or in the code that I write back to that broader business idea, then eventually the benefits will come to you. So I think business savvy is really key.
And it's really interesting because you didn't just learn the tech piece. You also were started managing people. You had more and more responsibilities, both from a management of the people, as well as, I'm assuming that you start interfacing with some very high positions in your organization, the customer side, because you were brought in as the authority sometimes, right? Hey, Ira, can you explain how does this work, right? How did you manage to get all of that under control? Again, there's a lot of silos, things that you have to catch up on.
Yeah. I think there's an immense amount of pressure whenever you're performing. You're going in front of a customer, you're going in front of your boss, even sometimes your spouse or your family. It's a matter of the fear of, do I really know what I'm talking about? And imposter syndrome and all of that.
Doesn't it say like fake it until you make it?
Exactly. Definitely a motto that I support. But it's more a matter of understanding what value am I delivering to this customer. They're mitigating some of their risk by outsourcing some function to me. They brought me in to fix a project. What is this person's job and how are they getting measured? What does their boss want from them? How do they tie into their business? You have to understand that, so when you go in front of them to present the weekly status update of your implementation project, you're actually bringing those questions in context of their life. If you're just giving them an update based on what's interesting to you, you're not delivering value. Even if you did a lot of great engineering tasks in order to deploy firewalls or roll out an EDR or implement a SIM, you're not delivering value to that client until you speak that language. So I think I learned that early on, and I think the same is true with managing people. You have to have an openness where you're willing to learn from them and understand what drives them, what do they want out of their life and career, how do you support them in getting there, and explaining the same to them. Here's what's important to me, here's how we fit into this together, here's how we can support each other. It's not always easy, but that's, for me,
I say it's super tough.
Yeah.
Because I would tell you that a lot of people would not tell you what is important to them. You got to figure out on your own.
Yeah.
And sometimes they tell you, but they give you the wrong information. So you're talking about some very hard soft skills that you have to acquire.
Yeah, and I did not acquire them in the technology world. So when I was in university, I volunteered as a tutor in prison, in federal penitentiary. And the school I went to was in a prison town as well as a university town. And I like to say, and later in life when I was managing salespeople, all the strategies I gained in managing salespeople, I learned in prison.
I would say they're a little bit of prisoners, right? They acquire all the really expensive toys, and now they have to pay for it, right?
I think working in prison, you understand several fundamental things. One is the path that got someone to this place is very different than the path maybe that you or I took. Not that it's always circumstances, but there are likely circumstances there that you have to try to understand in order to understand why is this person here today. The other is everyone tells you a story and everyone tells their own story. Whether that story is true, whether that story is false, you have to parse through that for yourself. I think even in the free world, people tell you their own story and you have to understand what percentage of this is true, what percentage of this is false, and do I care? And understanding that story people are telling where they're coming from, making a connection with them, and then essentially assisting them getting what they want done, whether that's learning how to read, learning how to do advanced math, or meeting your sales quota. I think there's fundamental similarities there. And if management is really about understanding and working with people, you can gain those things being a camp counselor, which is something that I did, tutoring in prison, doing many other things besides working in a company or working at a cybersecurity company.
Yeah, I know. It's absolutely amazing. One would not think that you can translate some of the skill set. So how many hours, Ira, do you think you have interfacing? It's just interfacing with people. Just if you could put your finger or a rough estimate, how many? Because they say 10,000 hours. I don't know if that number is even true anymore. Some people say it's not true.
I did think about this early in my career when people would say, are you technical enough? Can we rely on you for expertise in this? And I would say, can I tell them that I've had 10,000 hours doing cybersecurity yet? It's definitely more than that at this point. In terms of working with people, like I think we all have those interactions in our daily life, and someone on the corner, someone at a store that you work with, you can choose whether you can be pleasant and work with that person to get what you want done out of that interaction, or you can choose to not pay attention, be disrespectful, and it's what life do you want to lead? And I choose the one where I'm productive and collaborative with people.
But what's also interesting is that it's obviously fundamentally was your ability to interact with people and understand where they're coming from and what drives them was a key to your success. But then you can take an undergrad master's degree, you can go to so many schools, and it's not something that's being taught. There's no curriculum associated with it. In fact, I think you should look at the younger generation because of the mobile devices and the interaction. They're actually using that capacity to interact well and have that emotional intelligence of what the other person is like. What do you recommend? Like, I know that's a statement, it's a pretty heavy statement.
No, education is critically important, and you can learn great skills through a variety of different paths. And I don't think one path is right for any one person. It depends where you're starting. It depends where you want to go to. But there is no substitute for field experience. Field experience teaches you everything, whether that's I'm in a data center installing a piece of hardware or plugging this cable in, which this entire company's information flows through, or whether it's I'm standing in front of a customer and tap dancing because they're asking me a hard question that I don't really know the answer to. My advice to anybody, do the school that you need to do in order to get to where you need to be, but don't forget about that field experience and get it as early as possible. If you're just sitting in a back room crunching numbers somewhere, that may be exercising the skills you learned in school, but being in front of someone and being challenged in that human way is the way that you advance, because you can overcome those challenges, you can learn from them, you're going to fail, you're going to be embarrassed at times, but if you have a team that supports you and you can find people around you that support you, eventually you'll learn and learn much faster than you would if you just try to learn that in school.
Absolutely. I always recommend for people to start doing something. Dr. Ciso was started a career laying cables in a data center, right? So the problem is you don't get that from sitting behind a screen and having that virtual. Virtual is only taken so far. You need to have a hands-on experience. Let's fast forward to, just for the sake of time, fast forward to today. So you've done some interesting things, and now you're doing even more. It's really cool. Let's talk about M&A for a bit. First of all, for the people who are not familiar with this whole process of mergers and acquisitions, what is it? Well, let's get a really short primer about what that is.
Yeah, simply, M&A is really, if you think about building a business, so anyone can start a business tomorrow. It might be a lone wolf where I go out and start to do some consulting. That's a business. Or someone gives me money to develop a product that I then sell to customers. It could be a services business. It could be a software. It could be a hardware business. There's lots of different types of businesses out there. If you're building something of value in that business, you can gain customers, you can gain revenue, and hopefully some profitability out of it. Even if you don't have profitability, there's likely someone who's going to be interested in that business if you build it to a certain scale. There's lots of different investors in this world. These investors are putting money to work from different pension funds or different sources of money that they will get from their partners to invest in these businesses. And fundamentally, that's what M&A is. Someone looking to acquire a business, whether it's a business acquiring a business or an investor acquiring a business, because they see some inherent value in that and want to benefit from that value over time.
And thank you for that. So, speaking about cybersecurity, since they're not manufacturing widgets, it's very complicated. It's complex. It's like a lot of moving pieces. Is that where you come in? That's where I think that requires people like yourself to figure out value, right? Figure out what are the pitfalls, commercial pitfalls, what's the market like, and so on. Talk to me about the complexity of looking specifically at cybersecurity company to get acquired or for sale.
Yeah.
And where do you come in the process?
So I think there's a spectrum of interesting work to be done in deals when acquiring companies that's related to cybersecurity. At its most basic, there's cybersecurity due diligence. So this is non-cyber companies or cyber companies. I'm buying any company, let's say, or I'm an investor or a company that wants to acquire another company. And I need to answer the question of, is this company's security any good? Have they been breached? And what do I need to worry about going forward? Cybersecurity due diligence is the answer to that. It's a specific engagement. It may include technical testing. It may not include technical testing and just be desk work. But the same principles apply as we were talking about before, which is you're getting to know people. You're trying to understand what's behind the story that they're presenting to you. You make a relationship with them and you understand what's happening in this business and you present that back to your client, identify risks. There's a whole spectrum of more diligence that extends into, is this an interesting market that this company is in? If they're a cyber services business, are they doing professional services? Could they make that into a recurring business? Are they a software business? What is the demand for this software? Who are the competitors? What other deals have been done out there? And 5 years from now, is someone going to continue buying this blue item in cyber, or are they going to buy the purple item instead? And I think that's really what diligence is answering. You're mitigating risk for the investor and acquirer. You're giving an objective opinion, and you're bringing most importantly, you're bringing your operator experience, that field experience I talked about before. Anyone who's doing an acquisition really wants to understand, how do customers perceive this company, and how will they perceive it tomorrow as we continue to invest in it to change? And people who have that field experience, whether as operators in companies or as customers at large enterprises who buy cybersecurity technology, are uniquely suited to answer that question.
So that's where you come in, right? So you're the expert mechanic, basically, that has been working as a mechanic for so many years, and he's coming over. I now want to buy a Rolls Royce, and I've been working with luxury cars for 20 years. So I'm, as an expert mechanic, if I simplify this, can come in and I know what to look for. Is that kind of like simplifying that?
I think that's a good way of thinking about it. You could call, so that's a great example using that analogy. You could call the large Ford dealership and say to them, give me analysis of this Rolls Royce. They would spit something out for you. It would probably be reasonably cheap. They would get the job done. They know a lot about cars, so they definitely identify whether it drives and how fast it goes. You could go to the import side, the Toyota dealership, and they know a lot about cars too. They see it from a different angle. But really, until you go to the person who really knows the Rolls Royce to assess it, then you're getting the unique opinion and the operator view. And that's really what we are for cyber.
And it's really interesting because sometimes, even the example of the Rolls Royce, sometimes maybe Rolls Royce is a large investment, so maybe you do need an expert. But sometimes calling in, like checking out the credit or looking at one of the credit bureaus and looking at to see if there's any history, it's good enough, right? Depends, right? If you come in to a very unique opportunities, right? Because again, you cost a certain amount, the company costs a certain amount, so you don't get brought in for, I'm assuming, for every single opportunity. You get brought in for some very specific ones, right?
Yeah, I think the way that we coach our clients on engaging diligence providers or advisors on the buy side when they're buying companies is to involve them early in the process, and that no question or informal inquiry is too small, because when you're developing your thesis, even before you've identified the company, you're saying, I like the idea of security operations. People are going to buy it for a long time. They need to do it. They might do their SOC in-house. They might do it outsourced, but I like the idea of that, and I want to find a company that does that. There's 30 different ways in which we can slice that market. Do you service a small, medium business? Do you service a public company, a larger company? Who are the types of companies and what are the types of software that those end market customers use? You have to identify that really early on if you want to have a successful transaction. So I think it's important to engage early on. At the same time, you need to understand that these deals, typically investors are spending millions of dollars, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or even billions of dollars on these companies. And advisory is important. You have legal advisors, you have tax advisors, you have financial advisors that are optimizing all the numbers. You obviously want to understand the product, the business from a service delivery and operations perspective. Am I going to get what I'm expecting to get? And let me get an objective third-party opinion of that. So I think that's the area that we primarily play in.
And I know that there's a match.com if you want to get, but how does a buyer, as you mentioned, let's say the thesis is, okay, I like the EDR, I like endpoint security, and I'm now looking, I'm in the market. How do you even go about, there's so many companies that do the same, right? How do you go about to start like shopping? Is there like an app where you swipe to see if there's any, what's the process?
There's several apps. There's things like Crunchbase and PitchBook, which I would call more of a top-down analysis that allows me to sort and filter and say, what are the interesting companies doing X? The risk or the reason that data has been murky is that anyone can tag their company as anything. So I can call myself an endpoint security company, but really the question as an investor I'm probably asking is, does this compete with CrowdStrike? And am I trying to beat CrowdStrike, or am I doing something supplementary to that people will buy because they already have SentinelOne or because they already have Defender?
Sometimes that is very, as you mentioned, murky, right? Because you can have a company that potentially competes with.
Exactly. So that's why we try to do more. Everyone does their own top-down work. Let's map the market. Let's see who's out there from the outside in. What buzzwords are they using? What's on their website? Maybe we have calls with technical buyers at large companies and understand, how do you use this product? Why did you buy it? Tell me more about that. A lot of investors or acquirers will put that picture together, but then they need a bottoms-up analysis from someone who's actually used the tool, who's bought something different, who's competed with them in the market, who's been in the channel. And that's where through relationships typically, or through referral, you would find someone like us.
What are the kind of pitfalls, right? Because there's a lot of money to be made.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever there's a lot of money to be made, there's also a potential for massaging the numbers. Right? We see that a lot of times where companies that acquired for a certain valuation, and then lo and behold, lose like tens of thousands of customers, and we're not actually customers, so we're just supply, something like that. Tell me a bit about how do you approach that, and knowing that your reputation is on the line, because you're the one who provides today the seal of approval. They can decide whatever they want to do afterwards, but it's your reputation to uncover this.
Absolutely. So there's a baseline level of due diligence that you need to do in order to be in this business, that if you're not doing, you may as well go home, because the risk is too high for you as a provider to do that. Now, thankfully, there's specialists. So from a tax and a financial perspective, you go to a specialist for that, the same way you come to a specialist like us for cyber, business, market, product, operations, expertise. You really just need to consider all the possible eventualities and outline what your beliefs on that are. You're an objective opinion. You work with the information that you're given. There's a lot of disclaimers around that, but if you develop a great relationship with the company and really seek to understand their business, then you should be able to provide something of value to the investor. The idea here is not to try to step outside of your lane and say, I think the growth projections for this company they're not going to be able to meet them with that profitability because of these reasons. You can provide your opinion on that, but you really need to stay focused on the questions that support the acquisition of this company and how you take part in answering them. Who does this company compete with? How are they well positioned to do that? What does the team look like? Has the team been here before? What's your impression of them? There's huge amounts of facets to this diligence, and I think it's not for the faint of heart, obviously, because it's a complex service, but that's why there are so few people who do it well. You can't just make this into a cookie cutter engagement. You really need to have the field experience in order to make it work.
And, when you're applying for a job, a lot of times they don't call your references. They call someone else. They call somebody else. They know you. I know a lot, especially at the higher level. Is that also something you do? You have a vast network. For your company, you might call somebody that potentially wasn't a direct reference, but has ability to provide you insight into what the technology or potentially how they're doing in the marketplace. Is that something you do?
Absolutely. So there's multiple important players in this market. There's obviously past customers and clients, so strategic companies or investors who have worked with us in the past who we're always happy for anybody to call. But there's also the investment bankers who are a critical part of the M&A market, and these are folks who are representing the buyers or the sellers to actually market the company to get the deal done. And we build relationships with the best cyber bankers out there, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship because we're available to complement them when they have engagements, and we refer customers into them when we're working with companies who want to understand what's it going to take for me to sell this business. We give them the operations, field level, cyber market view, and then the bankers are the ones who will actually take the baton and help to sell that company.
I'm assuming because of the complexity, I'm assuming there's always live stuff, right? It's never something that's super pristine. It's amazing. It's just, let's go out and just spend the money. There's always something to uncover. How do you then able to figure out, okay, is that really important? Or is that potentially a diamond in the rough where they're going through struggles, but if you do this X, Y, and Z to propel them into a 5X revenue for what they have. So how do you measure that? Because that's also, I'm assuming, part of your due diligence, right? How to figure out what's really important and how potentially, even if there's some flaws, they can be turned around into a more successful business.
Absolutely. Hardest part of the job is once you've identified the risks, red, yellow flags, is classifying them into the likelihood of the risk and the impact of the risk. And it's a numerical value. It spits out a quantitative formula. Anyone who's done risk management has done this before. You put your risk register together, you estimate the likelihood and the impact. And I would say this is an area where you need to also maintain as much objectivity as you can, because sometimes you'll have clients who will say, we know you rated that impact as 9, but really we see that impact as 6. You should reduce it to 6. Maybe you do reduce it to 6, you meet somewhere in the middle, you understand what the evidence for that is, but you want to maintain a level of objectivity while also rating those risks accordingly. It's definitely the hardest part of the job, but you just have to put yourself in the shoes of the company. If I'm the CEO or the COO of this company, and I need to go execute on this plan tomorrow, and I have these 20 things in front of me that are flashing lights that I need to deal with. What's the one that I deal with now? What's the one that I put off till next quarter? When you put that operator hat on, it actually becomes a lot easier to put a roadmap together to say, here's 20 things that are issues with the company. We don't believe any of them are fatal, but you always do find something. It's at least something interesting, otherwise we're not doing our jobs. And then you roadmap that out over time and say, here's when you think you should execute it. The investors, the company may bring some of those forward. They may push some of those back. That's their prerogative to do that, but at least we're laying it out there and giving them an informed opinion about it.
And is there, coming back to the car example, sometimes you take it to a mechanic, they check it out, and they give you some sort of warranty. They tell you, I've tested it, this is like it's worth X, and if some of your engine blows up as soon as you drive from the parking lot, I take responsibility because I tested it. Is there such a thing in the M&A where you are giving the okay, and they acquire it, and things blow up 2 months later?
Yeah, so such a thing does exist. It's called reps and warranties insurance. And so anyone who's in this business knows that insurance is a super important part of any acquisition process. The way we see it, though, is that we don't only want to be involved in the transaction. Just doing a transaction and submitting a report and participating in that and going home is not delivering as much value as if, on the other side, if we could be involved post-close, help with post-close integration, actually execute on the roadmap. And so I think that's a unique thing about the company kernel, which is that we have the M&A advisory business, but then we have the technical security advisory as well, a virtual CISO business and everything that comes with that. And so we put out the roadmap, but say, let us actually be the Maytag repairman and fix that, not just give you the PowerPoint that says what you should fix. So I think that's investors or companies' warranties, is getting people involved in post-close integration.
That's interesting. And at what point you say my work is done? I'm successful, everything's done. I'm no longer needed.
Once the bill is paid, obviously. But I think really we try to be involved in the entire life cycle. Some people are more comfortable with that, some people aren't, and we respect that. Once you do your job and the deal is done, everyone shakes hands. It's a good deal for both sides. People move forward and execute on their plan. Really, our work often is done there. But the way to help us continue execute on the growth plans that the investor has put in place is to involve you post-close. So I would say when the deal is done, typically the work is done, but oftentimes we like to get involved in operations too.
And you'd think there's some ongoing contention when you do cybersecurity due diligence in a company, right? So on one side, they definitely don't want you to uncover anything that potentially can reduce the price, because I think that's what you can share with me, whether it's impactful to find out that their data center is a disaster and that they've had several breaches that nobody knew about, and that their database is actually outside on pasted, you know. That's on one side, they're trying to make sure that you don't know about it. And on the other side, your job is to uncover all of that. Talk to me about that relationship that you go through, because they also want to sell the company or they want you to somebody to invest. How that day-to-day works? Is there an adversarial relationship? And then, from your experience, do you find they're trying to hide like a constant thing where you really have to? Yeah, you're in front of a restaurant, but you're trying to check, see what's doing in the back, and they tell you, "Oh, sorry, we're renovating. You can't go in there." What's that process?
So there can be some animosity there. It can be adversarial. I think professionalism is absolutely key at this point. Everyone understands that there are certain steps that need to happen in order to get a deal done. If we're brought in as the diligence advisor, the seller understands this is something I need to do in order to get the deal done, get my money or get an investor in so that I can grow my company. So there's an acknowledgement that we got to do this together. Now, there's a playing field there that you don't want to step outside of. So you don't want to ask for things that are unrealistic. You don't want to waste people's time. And typically our message to sellers is, we're not looking for you to create any new material. We just want to look at stuff that's off the shelf, information that you have. If it's not written down, just tell us. And we just want to gather information there. So I think naturally there's a bit of hesitancy at the beginning to say, let's not go into that level of detail. I may not want to share that. Eventually, with conversations over time, typically good actors don't want to hide anything, and so you get that sense early on in a relationship with someone.
Talk about the soft skills, right? You can probably tell right now if somebody's like really being truthful with you, right?
Exactly. The prison experience is really helpful there, but really you're just building that relationship, because people who have done transactions before understand that if there's something there, it's going to be found out sooner or later. It's better if it gets found out sooner. You put it up front and you really model what that means for the deal. In many cases, the price never changes. I mean, I can only count a small handful of times where a price has changed or a deal has been scuttled because of product, market, business due diligence. There's definitely examples out there in the market. I'm telling you from my experience. What does change, though, is our investment case post-close. We plan to spend X amount of money modernizing corporate IT and internal infrastructure. Now we're spending X plus 15%, because we've identified that there's a bunch of on-premise stuff that people forgot about, or whatever the case may be.
And speaking of which, sometimes they're truthful, but they just don't know. They have no asset management. They have no idea when the system got patched. They may went through an acquisition of their own, where they acquired a third-party infrastructure, and all of a sudden they have no idea what's in there. How do you then, there's so much you can gather from them. What if they don't know what they have?
Yeah. Those are the most difficult engagements, because really you're at a point, you gather all the information that they have, you have a bunch of unanswered questions, and you're at a crossroads. We can go, let's think of a basic example, pen testing. Most modern companies do some manner of third-party pen testing annually, quarterly, maybe they do it internally, whatever it is. If you walk into a company that you're about to acquire and say, send me your last pen test report so I can review the results, and they say, what's a pen test? Or they say, we know we need to do a pen test, but we haven't done one before. You have a fork in the road. You present the risk. This company has never been assessed externally, or they haven't recently been assessed externally. They're giving you a bunch of information about their vulnerability management program, maybe showing you some scans, but they haven't been assessed by a third party. Do you want this to be done now as part of this diligence, and either us or a third party will come in and do that? Or do you want to accept that risk and understand that you may uncover something post-close? By and large, people are going to want to answer that question ahead of time, because there's lots of great pen testing providers out there, and you can check that box, figure out, is there something here that I should know about, and move forward with the analysis.
And what if all of a sudden you realize that they have a certain IP, and then you do a quick search and you find that a secret recipe or their methodologies are all over. So now the evaluation is, if it's available and the IP is available for everybody to see, you have sometimes these difficult conversations with the clients.
What's most interesting about the concept of proprietary. What's proprietary? So I'd say it happens less that we find a leak of source code online, although that has happened in several documented deals that are public in the past. What happens more frequently is you start an initial take with a customer, whether they're a services company or a software company, and they say, hold on a minute, that's proprietary. We need you to sign this extra NDA. We need to lock your hands because we're about to tell you information that's so secret that if you had it, you would be able to steal the value of our company. Realistically, nothing is that transferable and nothing is that golden from a proprietary perspective that if I just learned about it, I could go execute on it. So much of the success of a company is in execution. Obviously, there are proprietary things and intellectual property that are valuable to a company, but any seller or any business owner who believes that those are so secret that as part of a diligence engagement where I'm trying to sell my company that I can't reveal, to me just indicates that it's not that proprietary. They're trying to make it seem something more than it is. Maybe it's know-how, maybe it's experience, but it's not really some golden nugget of proprietary information.
I couldn't agree more. If you get people that ask you, I'm sure I have this great idea for a company. I don't want to tell you because pushing people out and replicate it or have it. I say, go right ahead. The idea is a dime a dozen, right? It's not about the idea, it's about how do we take that idea into fruition and execute. So what are the current challenges that the companies are really struggling with in this whole industry? Because I'm assuming there's more than one. I'm assuming that because of the complexity associated with reviewing security posture and all the past events and all those systems and so on. If you can pinpoint like one or two major hurdles that are currently companies are facing to do diligence on cybersecurity, what would that be?
Yeah, so I think from a technical perspective, looking at security due diligence, assessing whether a company is secure or not, the biggest problem that these companies have is showing their work. In many cases, they do good work. It's a different level of maturity at every company. You have sometimes some mature company where it's very clear that they're not doing advanced detections from a security operations perspective. That's clear. Maybe they don't need that at the size that they're at. Maybe the stack doesn't need that based on what they have in their environment. But even in an advanced company that is very mature, we often find that those companies are not great at showing their work. They're not reporting that up to the board. They're not reporting that to prospective investors and saying, here's our program. Here's the strategy that we have from a security perspective. Here are the tactics. Here's what's going well. Here are the metrics that we use to measure that. If someone were to give me a 2 to 3 slide overview of their security program and it had all of those components in it, the stuff that I would expect.
It's almost an oxymoron. Why don't they have it? They have people on staff. It's probably their job is to communicate to the board and the executive. So you think that they, any given moment in time, if they get called into a boardroom and being asked, tell me, how are we doing from a security perspective? What are we doing to protect the organization? They'll have, 3 slides.
You would think that with the amount of products and the amount of chatter out there on the internet about how to manage risk and all of that, that it would be quite widespread. There are some companies who do a great job of it, but the real answer is it's super hard. It's hard to do that. It's very hard to advance your security program in both a qualitative and a quantitative way, advance it to the point where you can measure and show that improvement over time. That's something hard that people are dealing with. From a cyber security company strategy perspective, everyone's clamoring for buyer attention. I either have a product or a service that is in a mature market segment that everybody buys. So think pen testing, we talked about EDR, even SIM is still giving. Exactly, yeah. Maybe there's a magic quadrant for it. Even if there isn't, It's something that you know, whether it's a large enterprise or small, medium business, people buy this today. And I think those are reasonably clear-cut markets as to what's mature today. You then have the things that are maturing, and you need to bet, is this going to be something that everyone allocates budget to because Gartner said so? Or is this going to be something that no one's going to allocate budget to? On paper, it seems like a really interesting and super important thing to do, like classifying your data, for example. But the number of people that have actually bought the product to do that or have successfully implemented it, DLP is a perfect example, such a long-standing market. I remember many years ago working on lots of complex DLP projects. A lot of the concepts are still the same today and they haven't been solved. How do you classify this data? Are there a lot of false positives in terms of detections? Where should these detections come from? Is it agents? Is it agentless? Am I plugging into cloud and endpoint and so on? So if I'm looking at a company that's in that space, I have to answer all of those questions and give an opinion to the investor to say whether this is going to go up and to the right tomorrow, because for all of these tailwind reasons, regulatory, the changing nature of business, people are going to need this. And even if they do need it, are they actually going to buy it, and are they going to buy it from this company? And that's a very complex question to answer, but it's much easier for us to answer when the company makes it easy for us to answer. So that they show the numbers, but then they also show their plans and why customers are gravitating towards them.
And it's a process too. It can't be a point in time. And I believe, again, it has to be in the DNA of the company to cognitively say, okay, let's figure out, given a point in time, we can showcase where we are from a cybersecurity perspective. Now, you also would think that this will be propel business, right? Because now there's a lot of due diligence that suppliers and people that do business with you, they want to know that you're not going to be their weakest link as soon as you sign a contract with you, right? What would you recommend for companies that know that they have a gap in what you just described? Where do they start? Okay, Ira is talking gospel. I know what he's saying is true, and I know we need it.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get from whatever wishy-washy place we are here to get to the nirvana where Ira can come over to our office, we showcase what we have, and he said, guys, you did a phenomenal job. You guys are ready to get one.
Yeah. So I think a lot of that third-party risk and being assessed as a supplier is still checkbox work. So you have to make sure you're doing the fundamentals for that checkbox, just specifically to propel your business and make sure that your end-to-end enterprise procurement cycle is working. You need to make sure you're doing the check. You need to make sure you're checking the boxes. But from a security program perspective, if you're building from zero, you need to start measuring something. Mm-hmm. Even if it's how fast do I patch critical vulnerabilities, what percentage of my complete asset scope do I scan for vulnerabilities, basic things related to vulnerability management, asset management, key hygiene of the program. It gets overwhelming if you try to measure everything. Find an impactful metric or two or three that you know are fundamentally important to making your security better. Answer the basic question of how can I make this company's security better and how can I measure that over time? Start tracking that and build. It's like a house, you build brick by brick. If you build a really strong foundation, you're going to have a great house over time. If you build a wobbly foundation and try to do all sorts of fancy stuff without having the basics in place, you will ultimately fail.
Are they particular frameworks? Some companies are big on frameworks. They're not like NIST or like some sort of SIG. They just get through the process of compliance, through the process of getting through a framework and getting more mature from a security perspective. Do you have any favorites?
There's lots of great frameworks. This is what I love about security. It's not a secret what you need to do to be secure. The information's all out there. There's a great checkbox. There's a lot of great software for that.
Everybody talks about fundamentals, right? Yeah. Have a 2FA, have even hygiene, all that stuff. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do, but
actually doing it is extremely hard. So saying multi-factor authentication, we all understand it. If you have a complex business with a lot of technical debt, you may have 90% of your environment covered with MFA, but 10% you're still struggling to get to. And that's just a reality of a lot of companies today. So I think the actual framework, which one you use, doesn't really matter. Look at your jurisdiction, whether you're in Europe or the UK or US or Canada. The governments have a variety of different interesting frameworks. CIS is a really great one for people to start with, and there's a lot of great free tools online. So I would just say pick one that makes sense for your business, meaning you can understand it and the stakeholders you're presenting to can understand it and focus on that. You can always change over time. There's a lot of cross-mapping between those frameworks.
And you'd think that capitalism or like market forces would force the companies to get better, right? So one thing that can come to mind is that cyber insurance, right? There's a lot of companies out there that come up for renewal, and the cyber insurance companies does their due diligence and figure out, hold on for a second, you're not doing this XYZ, and you can continue not doing XYZ, but your premium now is like 5x, or you can fix it. Are there any market forces in play that are forcing companies to become better?
Yes. Premiums are going down for our customers who have great technical controls and can show their work on those great technical controls. So in our virtual CISO business, a lot of complex cybersecurity insurance for our customers, for businesses that from the outside, in some cases, may be high risk and insurers don't necessarily like them. The way we do that and the way that we explain to the insurance companies why this is an interesting business is by demonstrating our controls. It's the same way when you're presenting your business to be acquired as when you're working with insurers or brokers to demonstrate to them. All they want to know is, we have a questionnaire of controls. Do you do them or not? And if you don't do them, explain to us why. So put together a story and explain that. Obviously, you need to tell the absolute truth on that and be completely transparent. Otherwise, it's very bad for you and your business. But as long as you go in with that principle in mind, you need to demonstrate the controls you're doing. And there is a market force there. You will not get insured if your controls suck. Your premiums will be really high. If your controls get better over time, your insurance premiums will go down even for cyber. This whole world of cyber insurance premiums are going up forever. It's not the case anymore. Great companies that demonstrate great controls and mature over time, their premiums do go down.
And Ira, I feel like we haven't even covered like 1/3 of what I had to cover. So we went on tangents here, but it's really a great conversation. And running out of time, but I'd love to, as always, finish this conversation with something positive. The sky's not falling. You are in the midst of looking at companies from a cyber risk perspective and have a lot of exposure to what's happening. Tell me something positive that you see that really is making things better.
There's a massive world of opportunity out there. So you see the rate of change of digital transformation. I know it's a bit of a buzzword, but think about what happens in a company adopting new applications every day. All of these great new applications that come to market to solve business problems. That expands the surface of things we need to secure. And that means there's a cybersecurity service company or a cybersecurity product company that is going to help do that. So if you're interested in cyber, you get involved with one of those, and it's going to be a great next 5, 10, 100 years, hopefully.
What you're saying is it's going to be a hell of a ride.
I think so.
Thanks so much, Ira. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.